Good afternoon. I'm Ed Pozzuoli, CEO Tripp Scott, and with me today is our COO of Tripp Scott and our key employment director, Paul Lopez. Paul, welcome.
Good afternoon, Ed. Good to be with you, as always.
So let's talk a little bit about what businesses need to be concerned with as we begin to get into phase one of reopening in South Florida. So give us some of the issues that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're living in unprecedented times. So obviously businesses have to be really alert and really smart about how they're going to start trying to gear back up. So one of the things that obviously we are stressing to our clients and our friends in the community are that you've got to follow the CDC protocols. When you open up, you've got to make sure that you are taking measures to try to, number one, screen your employees before they come into work.
What does that mean?
So screening them, for example, take their temperature. Go get yourself one of those contactless thermometers that as your employees come in, every employee should have their temperature taken. And you should make sure that you fill out paperwork that reflects that those employees that you're allowing to come back into the workplace are fine. They have no temperature. They have no sign of any sort of symptoms. So you are documenting this as an employer, as a company. You're trying to make sure that you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's so that people that are coming in and their coworkers all know that they've been screened and that they're okay, at least ostensibly from a symptom standpoint. That's the first thing you can do. Second thing you need to do is obviously make sure that you set up your office in a way where social distancing is possible. It doesn't make sense in a, let's just say a 2,000 square foot office, you're going to cram in there 150 employees. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now. So you probably need to be really smart about maybe staggering the shifts of employees that come into work. Maybe you have alternate dates that certain employees come in. Make sure that the logistics of your office make sense. In other words, if you have cubicles where you have 4 to 6 people sitting normally side by side, probably a good idea not to have that happen right now. So maybe you stagger people that come in on certain days so that maybe you only have 2 employees or 3 employees working in a particular area, and then the next day the other employees come in. And importantly, as we're seeing across the country, lawsuits are being filed by the hundreds right now. The last report we've seen, there could be over 700 to 800 lawsuits that have been filed in the context of COVID-19. The type of claims that are being made against employers: failure to screen employees, failure to implement social distancing policies, failure to enforce social distancing policies. So like I tell my clients about employee handbooks, it's great to prepare a handbook, but it makes no use, or you can't make any use of it
if you're not living up to it.
If you're not living up to it and enforcing it. I mean, it's critical right now. Look, as a company, you have potential exposure, you have potential liability. One of the things that we're telling our clients to do is make sure your workers' compensation policies are up to date. Why? Because if an employee suffers a COVID-19 illness while on the job and somehow that's attributable to your workplace, even though you took reasonable measures, they may have a workers' comp claim. Well, if you don't have your comp coverage, now you don't have the insulation that you otherwise would with your insurance policy. So dust that off too. Take a look at the workers' comp policies. Those are some things you probably need to start thinking about now as we're starting to hopefully ratchet back up.
Now, there's been some discussion about providing some sort of immunity at some level to businesses as they open up. I mean, do you see that ever happening?
So the latest reports we're seeing is that that's certainly going to be something that's being discussed now in Washington. They're negotiating it like everything else. The next tranche of aid that may be coming out for workers and for companies could include a deal that includes some level of immunity. And you have to strike a balance, right? If you have absolute immunity to all employers, now you're creating a situation where employers aren't implementing policies or enforcing safe policies. What we're seeing is that there's going to be potentially some legislation that discusses immunity. And again, you're trying to make sure that if you have a bad actor, that person shouldn't have immunity. What does that mean? That means somebody who's really not implementing any of these policies.
Somebody's in total disregard of any of these.
It's just putting their head in the sand. And they've decided that they're just going to go ahead and not implement any of these policies, allow their workers to come back in, and damn the torpedoes. That's the type of thing that should be actionable against an employer.
Are there anything particular, again, that public-facing companies should be aware? People like restaurants and retail shops and those who deal regularly with public, particular concerns there.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, look, local government is going to be dictating a lot of that. And you're going to need to look at what your cities are coming up with, what your counties are coming up with, and you really need to follow those regulations, whatever those are, whatever the protocols are, whether it's a reduced percentage of patronage that's coming in.
Capacity issues, right?
Capacity issues, but you're going to have to show that you're following that to a T, because if you're not, again, you're creating exposure for yourself. So what are we telling our clients that are hotels, restaurants, folks that are providing services to the general public? Monitor on a day-to-day basis what your local government officials are telling you to do, and don't deviate from that. Look, the best way you as a company can insulate yourself from any exposure is if you can point to that the fact that you followed your local government officials and what they told you to do. You should have a relatively good sense of insulation from liability.
Now, there's a debate about masks, but as to whether or not they're helpful or not, but from a business standpoint, what should be the view?
There's competing theories out there. It seems to be that if you're using the right masks and using them correctly, they seem to work. So from a business standpoint, to the extent that it's practical, number one, your employees, when they come back to work, when they're in the public corridors of your workspace, you should advise them, and you should in fact enforce the policy of wearing masks when you're in the public sphere in your workspace. Now, if you're in your office, if you're in your cubicle, probably a time where you can get some relief from that. Look, one of the things we see with the masks, they're uncomfortable. They're not fun to wear, but are they effective? It seems like they might be. So probably a good protocol for you as a business that is, again, starting to try to ratchet up. Make sure your employees are wearing masks. And importantly, let's just say, for example, they're not working, but we don't know that. It certainly eases the anxiety of your coworkers. People like to see that others are wearing masks and they're trying to take some reasonable steps that at least appear to provide
It's a
some
consideration
protection.
For others.
Of course. And again, it's one of those things where, look, people with thousands of employees or just 100 employees or even 10 employees, everybody has different levels of anxiety. We see that here at Tripp Scott. We see that with our clients. People have different barometers for when they really get stressed out. Our job as employers is to make sure that we're trying to lower the temperature as much as possible.
From an anxiety standpoint.
Absolutely. From an anxiety standpoint, because you want your workers to be there working and being productive and not being so racked with anxiety that they can't perform their jobs. We know many companies are struggling, and they're struggling to open their doors back up. But just imagine if you do it in a thoughtless way, what happens then? Now you really may never be able to open up again because your business has been devastated and you can't open up.
Well, I appreciate the comments, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.